Thank you all for coming to the Osterville Village Library on a very rainy day. As I said, I think this is something that only this room full of people would really appreciate after the summer we've had. But I'm pleased to introduce Jeannie Dodson-Edgars. She's a master gardener with Barnstable County, and she's doing the third of 3 programs that we've done with the master gardeners this year. She will share her 64 years of garden successes and teachable moments from failures. So I think you're in for a treat. Thank you very much, Jeannie. And you're on.
Hi, good morning. Well, I do think it's a great day because this rain is what we really needed. And I'd be interested to see how the soil responds. So when you think about fall cleanup, that is when I start preparing for next year. I start now. Most gardeners start now for next year because we're also very, very stingy about our time because in November, December, and January, we don't do anything but look at seed catalogs. That's the only time I have off. It's sort of like the reverse of teachers. I have the winter off, they have the summer off. Who gets the better deal? So fall cleanup to me is what do my beds need for next year? Any questions on that or debates? Okay, it's not moving. Nope, not going anywhere. How about page? Do we have a page down? Yeah. Suppose.
There we go.
Which one?
This one right here.
Okay, it did work up there.
No, it didn't. And
Okay.
I just.
So the foundation, of course, is a very fancy name called Permaculture. And I could give you a book of 300 pages and you would never read it. But permaculture means you're going to look at the environment the plant is going into. That includes the other plants there. Now, some of my experience, I started in Oregon. I went to horticulture school there. I'm a life science major. I didn't finish hort school because I started getting clients. So I never finished hort school, but I have a lot of chemistry behind me. So Oregon is one place I was, and everything that grows in Oregon will grow here. At least in the west part of Oregon, because in the east part of Oregon, it goes to zone 1 and 2, which is very, very cold in winter. And then I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And everybody goes, oh, it's so nice and warm. No, we get -10, -15, -20 degree weather at times. And we get summers about 85 to 90, and that's it. And we're 7,000 feet up in the Rocky Mountains. So now you have sandy soil, but the difference between there and here with our sandy soil is the substrate, or what the soil was made of in Santa Fe, is alkaline. It's sandstone. It's, those kind of things. Whereas here we have granite, and granite is acid. And clay. You look at all those different kinds of soils. So if you have something that can grow in a sandy soil in New Mexico, you may not be able to grow it here, even though New Mexico is only zone 5. So if you look at your zones, everyone understands that if we're zone 7A, 7B in the south part of Cape Cod, and zone 6A, 6B in Sandwich area, that will determine whether your plant will grow and thrive. Now, a lot of people take chances. So do I. I say, well, they say it's a zone 7 plant, but I'll try it in a warm spot in Sandwich, protected from winds and all that. And if it fails, I go, okay, done. And so you look at the co-host trees, and they call them, I'm forgetting the name, what they call them, but what you do is you get a group of trees that'll help each other out, or bushes or flowers. So that's called companion planting. I'll give you an example. In New Mexico, you have juniper trees, and then you have pine trees. Pine trees need shade and water to grow. Junipers will grow whether you like it or not. And junipers hold about 100 gallons of water. So you plant your pine trees near the juniper. I planted a ponderosa pine near it, near 3 junipers. So the ponderosa pine actually survived at an elevation it normally doesn't survive. So that's permaculture. You take a look at it. It's also, instead of adding digging up your soil every year and destroying soil structure. You just layer. You layer with mulch. You layer with all sorts of mulch. For instance, what do you make mulch out of? Grass clippings, leaves, soft things like off from your perennial plants and from your annual plants, but never weeds. And if you want a mulch that's going to go easily with you, it's going to take longer by just using those ingredients, but by not adding table scraps, I'm avoiding the four-legged critters. Four-legged critters, of course, are rats and all sorts of things you don't want. So you need to know, what fertilizers do I really need? On the Cape, we have an excess of phosphorus. So when you look at NPK, N is nitrogen, P is phosphorus, and K is potassium. Now, if you're a human being and you have too high of potassium, what happens? You have a heart attack and die. If you have too much potassium in a plant, it'll do the same thing. So chemistry in humans and chemistry in plants are very similar. That's how I learned it, because I was a life science major, so I applied it to humans and then plants. So if you want to test your soil for just nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, you can do it with University of Massachusetts Amherst. If you just want the pH of your soil, you can do it locally here at the Master Gardeners area. And there's a form, if you go on the Cape website, the Master Gardeners, you can fill out the form and submit your soil. Most soils are going to be tested acidic. Why are they acidic? From what I first talked about is the substrate that it's coming from. So just reviewing this for you. So these were just like reminders for me. There's also something called soil structure. And I'm sure you planted things. And if you planted things under a maple tree and you have a bed of flowers there, you'll notice there's a lot of roots in there. Well, the maple tree is going to suck up anything it can. I still plant things there. I just have to water them so that the maple tree doesn't take it all. So then I say, well, what does my maple tree need versus my plants? And so you can actually diagnose your plants by what they look like. And you can go online and say, my plant leaves look like this, and describe the plant, and you can actually find out if there's anything going on. You can also call the Master Gardeners and say, ask the same thing. We can help you with that. So you want to know your soil acidity, which is probably acid. So what do you do to lower the acidity? Well, everybody knows you add lime. Well, what you don't know is you can also add sulfur. Elemental sulfur. I'm not talking about chemical sulfur. I'm not talking about something that's made out of salts, chemistry salts. I'm talking about sulfur rock that has been ground up. And you add sulfur, and then the hydrangeas like it too. And it changes the pH. So you get more of an alkaline pH. Plants like to grow anywhere between 6 and 8. Most of them grow between 6.8 and 7.2. So that's the narrow band of acidity that we want. It's yellow. Sulfur is yellow, yeah. Ask the devil. So when do you fertilize? Fall and winter, no fertilizing. What you do is add mulch. But you fertilize spring to midsummer. And that depends on your plant too. Like I use organic fertilizers, and I've told you why. Chemical salts will accumulate in your soil and in your plant, and too much salt for soil or plant means an environment that they will not grow. What does this have to do with fall cleanup? Well, these are the things that fall is the time to build soil. So you add mulch, just add it on top. That's called, just layer it like lasagna. You layer your lasagna. Trees and shrubs, you know, you've seen those volcanoes around trees, and then the tree, it has about this much trunk and it's underneath the volcano of mulch. Well, that tree is now rotting in those areas. So you don't have mulch up on the trunk. And in fact, you move it away about 3 inches from the trunk of your trees and your shrubs, because if it stays there, insects, all sorts of bad things will happen. How many of you have poison ivy going up a tree? I had a lot of it. So poison ivy doesn't suck energy off the tree, but what it does do, it rots it underneath. So that's when the winds come and the tree goes, and hopefully not on your house. So that's why you keep the mulch away from the trees. But at the same time, how far do I mulch? I usually moving out. I mulch out for a diameter of 6 feet. And because I have a large property, and I have 1.5 acres. But if you're in the city and your tree, if you see the drip line of your tree, the drip line is the edge of the leaves, you can just do it to there because that's where the tree is feeding. And they say the soil roots of a tree or a shrub or a plant, any plant, if it's this tall, you lay it down, this is the area it's gathering nutrients. Now, when I moved into my place, it was just so thick with forest, there was no light getting to the forest. There's no light underneath it. And there were a lot of rotting trees, like I had mentioned. And I removed them. And now I have to go from there to where we are now, which is developing this soil. So if you have a grass lawn, you can broadcast mulch just with your hand, just put it a little bit on top, or you can get humic acid and put it on there. All of those things will be fine. Right now, I've given up on the thought of lawn because of our summer. And I'm going to be planting native wildflowers that grow about this high, and they're meant to replace lawn. A lot of the wildflower seed beds go up to, this, just like a pasture, but these only go this high because my husband begged me to have something to mow. So I said, you'll have something to mow. You just won't mow as often. So I'm trying, that's my new thing, because last year what I did is I threw seeds out in the spring and watered and watered and watered after the temperature of the soil was above 50 degrees. And I now have a pollinator garden.
Do you have to remove the thing?
Nope. What I do is right now I'm not doing anything to the pollinator garden because right now it's housing some of those critters that we want to have a home. And so next spring we will take the lawnmower and just mow it down, and then it'll grow then. And I mean early spring, late winter, because the lupins start coming up.
And would you add the?
I would do it in spring, late spring, May, June. I actually did it in June last year because it finally got warm enough, and I just had to water it for 7 days thoroughly. And after that, I never had to water it again. So it's intense. Any questions on that? Do you have pollinators in your garden? Do you know about the Pollinator Pathway program? They're trying to create a corridor of pollinator gardens throughout Massachusetts and the East. And you can actually go on the pollinator site here and see what gardens in your area have been registered. I haven't quite registered mine because I've been gardening all summer. And this winter is when I do things like register my gardens at places. So that way we can keep the monarch butterfly and all the other critters. The monarch is just like a leading species, but there's many behind it about to be qualified as in danger. And that's why we're all focusing on natives and perennials. And that really limits your choices in some ways, and it broadens it in others. Because if it's a native, the native trees, the native plants around that, and the native bugs are all going to like it and recognize it. You know how they want to sell you a flower, but they have multiple little, leaves instead of a single leaf? The bees can't get to that with multiple leaves. So single flowers, and then the bees can get to the honey or get to the pollen to make the honey. So.
I like this time of year, I like letting my annuals go to flower. I mean, I know they're not native. Like if I have coleus or something like that, earlier in the year, I'd pinch back the flowers to keep the foliage growing. But now for weeks now, I've just let them go to flower, and they're really attracting some nice insects to that.
So if you're going to be planting, plant by September 15th. And why do I say that date? It gives the plants time enough before our first hard frost to create a root structure. All you're doing this time of year is creating root structure. So that's what you want to encourage, and then mulch the plant and then just leave it. Don't prune it, just leave it. You know, if you're going to divide anything, you can divide things and plant them now, unless they're spring flowering bulbs. Those you just plant initially. You don't divide those at this time. You can just put them in the ground. Well, you can divide them if you get too many, but usually the chipmunks take care of that. So you plant in the fall for the spring. You plant garlic in the fall because it's not going to be ripe until next fall. It takes that long to grow. So
You're saying we can't plant green shrubs and trees now?
you can, and then you're taking a risk, but that's okay. You can mitigate that risk by where you place the plant and how you treat it. But usually what we want is a good solid root structure. But if you pull that plant out of the pot and it's all pot bound, that's a lot of root. So what we do is you just cut the sides of the plant diagonally on the pot, and the bottom basically free the roots, and then you put them in the ground with, if the pot is this wide, you dig a hole this wide and no deeper than what the pot is. So if you do all of that and add mulch and look at protective, you may be able to do it. I know. That's where I think I'm going to walk away from here for a minute. Because I had to really look to find a guide that I wanted to have with the information I wanted. So this has the pretty pictures, plus it talks about what the plant needs. Nodding trillium needs part sun to part shade. What does that mean? That means it doesn't have to have sun at noon. So all these, but they tell you what the plant wants to live in and whom it wants to live with. You can look up companion planting online and list your plant and find companion planting.
The same apply to moving plants and shrubs in the garden?
You can move shrubs and plants anytime from, it all depends. If they're early spring flowering, you don't move them. You wait till they flower, then you move them. If they're late spring, or, you know, I wouldn't move a hydrangea this time if it was large, but you can still plant from well, not from September. I mean, from usually about May through September 15. And I plant all those times.
So this would not be a good time to divide your hostas, for example?
You can divide the hostas now. They're pretty, you know, hardy. It's an exception. You could do that. I just got lazy and couldn't get around to my hostas. This summer was very hard to garden. I was in the garden with all the heat and humidity at least 4 hours a day because I planted this year. And then we had the drought. So I was out watering. And you know, when you water trees, how do you water trees? How do you water shrubs? And why do you water that way? You soak them. You water them once a week. My garden is watered once a week, deeply and long. So then the roots of the tree or the shrub or the perennial, any plant goes, oh, if I want water, I have to put roots out there because there's the water. The water's not here. If you only water right around the tree, the plant, you're only going to get roots right around the tree. You want to say, you have to go and get some more nutrition out there. And you'll see our forest, all the trees are sharing the same nutrition. So when I took those 31 trees out, which were next to the house and rotten and broken off, I created nutrition for the other trees, and my other trees are doing much better. A couple of years ago, we had a problem with, you know, pine fly, pine needle, pine, anyway, another insect that I hate. Some of them I love. And oh, where was I going? Where was I going? Anyway, shows you I'm a little anxious. What do I prune? Spring flowering, prune after flowering. Summer, fall flowering, prune in late winter or early spring. Yes, it will be cold outside. This is March. I'm out there in March. And it's not very nice in March. So dress up and go when it's not raining. So if you have hydrangeas, they grow and flower on different stems. And the macrophyllus or the big pom-poms grow on old wood. So the way Mal Condon calls it is if you look at your hydrangea, and if you look at the very bottom of the stem, and if it's all wrinkly, like an old person can get really wrinkly, that's an old cane, cut it out. And then what you'll have remaining is the new canes that were born the previous year, ready to bloom with flowers. If you cut those new stems down, those new canes down, you were eliminating flowers. But if it's so thick that there's too much room and you're just going to get mildew, you can prune some of those out. And then everything you do, you chop up and you add to the compost pile. Or I call it a mulch pile because I do not put food in it. So rake leaves, rake leaves, rake leaves again. Cut them up with a lawnmower if you can, and then pile them up. What we did on the perimeter of our property, we took all our grass and leaves, just grass and leaves, and piled it up around the perimeter of the property. 3 years later, we now have lots of rich mulch. And so we're going to the edge of our property and finding soil and putting it on the beds. Yes. I mulch the beds. Yeah, I even buy mulch if I didn't have enough. And there are a lot of suppliers. There are some that only will state their mulch is made from grass and leaves. And that's the one I recommend, because if it doesn't say that, you're going to get some weeds in it, and weeds that you don't want. Weeds that I go to the like Sanders and buy mulch from large organizations, get 9 cubic yards delivered, or 4 cubic yards or 5 cubic yards. They deliver all the way around. And there's some right in this area that will do it. They are pretty much geographically oriented. Yeah, it's I forget this full name, but if you say mulch organic Cape Cod on Google, you'll find those places. There's many of them. Did that answer your question? Okay, mulching, no critters. Is that it? That's it. But now what I would like is questions from you, because I have more information here than here. Any questions from the audience at home? I'm not sure how I can access that. So who wants?
Would this be a good time to cut off all the dead flowers on the hydrangeas though?
Yeah, right now would be fine, unless you want to have it for antiquing and just enjoy them in the fall, but you can do that. Pardon? Yes, she wants to know if you can remove the blossoms from the hydrangeas now. And you can, and cut them up and put in your compost pile, but I leave mine because they're winter interest to me. I don't do anything until the next spring, but then I'm exhausted by this time of the year. Literally. Any other questions? So what I'm trying to say is gardening is based on what you want and you need and what you want to do. If you want a lot of work, plant a lot of perennials. Yeah, well, no, spring, because it blooms in early spring. Did it? Oh, we're all crazy it up. Yeah, I would still wait till next year. In spring, yeah. So you want it so that if you prune this time of year, you're pruning for shape. If you prune in spring, you're pruning for how much it will grow or how it will grow. And also roses, by the way, I listen to Monty Don, and he's the jewel of a gardener from Great Britain. And he says, you know how you prune roses? And we all go, oh no, how do you prune roses? It's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I'll maybe know that. He goes, you prune them the way you want them to look. That's how you prune roses.
You have a question.
Oh, good.
In the chat. It says, when you water for a long time, how long is long?
So what I do is I put around the trees and the shrubs, I put my faucet, the hose on with not the gentle spray. I put it on the deep spray, and I stand there at the ground around the mulch. It's in the mulch, and I just shoot that down until I get puddling. And then I move around the tree, and I put depending on how large the tree is, I circle the tree with water on the edges of their leaves. So they have to reach out in the roots to get there. And then I move on. So it puddles, and then you move on to the next. And then a way you can check it is just put your hands in 2 days and see what happens. There's another product. Now, everybody knows about peat moss. Peat moss is also holding a lot of carbon. We're asking people not to use peat moss. But you can use coir, the coconut. And then there's this new product out that actually helps the plants hold the water. I don't recall the name of it now, but I meant to bring a whole bag of it. But I started planting with that because I planted a few weeks ago. And every plant that I put that material in does a function like a peat, they were still wet 3 days later. There were still moisture rings. So many of us master gardeners are experimenting with it, seeing how you use it, what you use it, and is it any good? More questions?
I don't, nothing, no one
Okay.
on Zoom has.
The gentleman first.
What's the best way to regrow them?
Are they the winter hardy geraniums? No, you bring them inside. Yeah, you bring them inside unless they're winter hardy. I don't know. I don't know that because I do very few house plants because I'm exhausted. I have enough to do as it is. Okay, where there we have experience right there. And your question?
I have two perennials that I'm ready to plant tomorrow, the next day. A fern and a grass.
Mhm.
So
We're a very warm year. I would do it. Again, you have to judge the year because our climate is changing so radically. We watched a show the other night from the Marine Coastal Center here in Hyannis, and they used to have icebreakers between Nantucket and Cape Cod. When was the last time you saw ice out there? So that was in the 1880s. We had ice out there. We also had lots of cod. I think we should call ourselves Cape Codless at this point. But climate is changing. It is changing, and it's doing weird things. All the maple trees we have on the East Coast, they're going up the line. They're starting to die off in the warmer areas. And in Santa Fe, they said there'll be no trees in Santa Fe by 2050 because of the drought. So this is serious, and this is affecting Cape Cod. We got that hurricane last year in October. They didn't know it was a hurricane until 3 days later. We had never had that kind of storm early in the year. And it is changing. I have my hydrangeas western facing. Don't plant hydrangeas western facing the pom-poms. They need shade in the afternoon. So I raised my hand to Mal and I said, well, Mal, I know that the pom-poms don't like the sun, but mine are planted in the west side and they get south sun, and they don't know they're not supposed to live there. But then he asked me a question. He goes, when were they planted? And I said, 1987. He goes, they have a root structure and tolerance to make it through. So what is a rule isn't always a rule. So that's what gardening is about. You take risk. Say, I'm not going to follow what she said. I'm going to plant now and see what happens. Do it.
I had a question. Someone mentioned planting grasses. You may have to repeat this for the people you have in person, but I have a very large grass plant that's very beautiful and it grows the tassels and it's kind of a centerpiece of my perennial garden. However, it's growing in a big circle. So what is in the middle is a lot of no growth. what's the best way to kind of rein in that cycle and maybe replant in the section in the center?
So the question is, what's the diameter of your,
The diameter of the roots? You mean, I mean, where the base is on the root?
no, the leaves, how, is it 2 feet, 3 feet?
I
1
mean,
foot?
when it's all in fall and bloom, you mean, all foliated?
How wide was it?
Do you mean when everything's all in full growth?
Yes.
6 feet,
Oh, okay.
guessing. I mean, it could be
I went to
less.
horticulture school in the 90s. The big fad was grasses.
Yeah, I inherited this. plant.
Gardening has fads. And we all said, let's plant grasses. There are some grasses you can plant, but the one she has is 6 feet. And the way you prune that plant is with a hedge trimmer. And they die in the center, and there's no cure for that. You pull that stuff out and hope that the roots will fill in eventually, because they die in the center. There are some grasses you can plant. Blue stem is one of them. It only gets about this wide. Carl Forrester gets only about this wide. You can see the grasses at Heritage and see which ones you want. But when we planted those big ones, and I have one in my garden in Oregon, and I'm expecting just to take it out this year because can't do anything with it, and it becomes dominant and it gets wrangly and doesn't look well. So how do you help your plant? I would just clear out the inside, put it back as far as you can to at least down to 6 inches, and see what happens next year.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Is the product Hydrangeas? Hydrangeas.
It could be.
It could be.
Yeah, it's made out of paper. It's recycled paper, and it's really kind of cool. And it's not very expensive.
This person
Hydrant.
asks, is the product to help plants hold moisture Hydrangeas? It's Hydretain.
Yeah, and anything to help our plants retain water. Because I have sand, and many of you have sand. Anybody have clay? You have clay? So if you add clay to sand, what do you get? Cement. So when you have a clay bed and you want to make it fluffier, mulching again. And that's one time that I would break up the soil a bit. And I don't mean dig down 12 inches. I mean just break it up so that there's paths for the mulch to go down and for critters to come up. Tiny critters, microscopic critters. And see, there's, okay.
On 2 acres of all woods with oak and pitch pine, missing fall color. But it's very, very shrubs.
Mhm.
So,
Yes,
I don't think the amount of flowering.
I got it.
Not.
So she said she has 2 acres of oak and pine and wants to plant something different. For fall color. So you're talking about maples is one of them. There is a Zelkova serrata, which is a nice little tree. It'll get about 25 feet tall and about 15 feet wide. Dogwoods. The Cusa does well. Yeah. Some people have the Floridas. My first language is Spanish, so if I pronounce things weird, if that's why. So yeah. So I planted dogwood. I planted 2 small maples. One of them can take full sun. And they're more the Japanese maples. They are Japanese maples, but they're going to get about 10 or 15 feet tall. Because another reason we remove some of the trees is we have solar panels on the ground. And I have to keep my trees from shadowing those. So I picked trees that are only going to get about 20 feet tall. Then I planted plums and a pear. And this coming year, the star magnolia is good, but you have to probably create space for them because what's going to grow under that canopy? You have to have some sun some way or another. Either you prune some of your oak and pines or you take them out.
We have a holly tree that's had about 12 foot. And we're trying to grow stuff. Shed the seeds. And I'm growing much successful underneath.
Suggestions on growing under holly trees. Well, holly trees are acidic, so their leaves are acidic. And so whatever they drop is going to be acidic. So if you plant plants who love acid down there, they're going to have a good time. So you look for acidic plants. If you plant things that like alkaline soil, they're going to go. And nothing more terrifying than spending $300 on plants and having them, half of them die. Say again. I'd have to go back to the drawing board. I've been wanting to make that list myself because I have to, because I have acid soil too in many spaces. So I'll get back to you on that. You could, yeah, you can Google it. Also the farm, has anybody been to the farm? It's a nursery. They have wonderful trees and it's locally owned and they give you a lot of information about their trees. Yes, Orleans. Hyannis Country Garden also gives you lots of info. Those people are well educated. They're good people. Scenic Roots Garden, I go to a lot because it's only 3 miles from my house. And I find every nursery has something really good about it. Soares has lots of natives. Even though they're not a big nursery, they have lots of natives. That's where I got my Chicago fig, which is another thing we're all trying out. Yeah, because it's supposed to be winter hardy. And last year I planted 2 of them and the larger one died back, but it grew from that. I just pruned it and it grew from that. So it is hardy.
I have another question here. Do you recommend mulching to overwinter raised beds, vegetable gardens, anything else?
Well, it depends on what you're going to do with your vegetable garden next year. We've added a lot of good nutrition and mulch to our garden, and it's very rich. And the way I can tell it's very rich is our peppers did not pepper. So peppers will not do well in very rich soil. So if you're going to dig your soil every year, I wouldn't mulch it. I would just add more nutrition next spring. But if you're going to use the same bed, just keep mulching them. Keep mulching them. You know, to keep doing that layered lasagna. And it really does work. If you're going to plant in a new site that has lots of grass or weeds, lay down cardboard first. Don't even dig in the soil. Just don't even remove the plant. Just lay down cardboard and put mulch on top of it about 3 inches to 4 inches and wait. And by next year, you might have to pull a few weeds, but pretty much you will not have weeds growing in that area. Then it's ready to plant. So what areas do I want to do that to? I'm right now preparing those beds for planting next year. I have a brand new bed that has a corkscrew willow on it. So this goes about your property. When you look at your property and watch how the rain falls and where it goes. And I stand out there on the porch and I go, okay, there's the river of rain and there it goes over there. And I've actually mapped it out. So when I wanted to plant my corkscrew willow, what do willows love? Water, 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 water. I planted the willow at the top of that little bog area I have. So it'll have drainage, but it's also right adjacent to the bog wetty area. And that's going to become my bog garden because it's the wettest part of my property.
Put a Dogwoods, sorry. Dogwoods surrounded by Pakistan. The dogwood really isn't doing well.
You just hit a very bad nerve. The Cape loves Pachysandra. I don't. Because it spreads easily and everywhere. And to get rid of it, I had to dig down 2 feet and put it over a shaker, and I shaked all the dirt out, and then I had all these roots from Pachysandra. Pachysandra is a good ground cover. And what's the tree? Dogwood. Well, dogwood is more acidic. What did the dogwood tree look like this year? Leaves?
It looks like it's dying.
Yeah.
It had been looking so good. Two removed by the back
Mhm.
stuff.
I wouldn't worry about the shape it's in now because that's the heat. Everybody suffered the heat. You have plant parts of the tree just die. And it is even impacting fall color because leaves went from alive to dead. You know, I would remove the pachysandra, but then I'm asking you to do a huge task. I would just add nutrition to the tree. And you could also test to see what it is if you go to UMass to see what's under that tree that you have to add, what you have to add, because what you might think you add, you may not have to. You definitely don't need to add phosphorus. So what does phosphorus do? It helps the plant become healthy and rich and bloom. But if we have a lot of it in our soil already, too much is not good. It's just like, you know, too many pieces of fried bacon are not good for you, but 2 is fine. That's my battle with bacon. I would get my soil tested to find out what's going on. Because a tree is going to look rotten for a while, but next year I think they'll come back. But again, mulching is going to help retain soil moisture too. I don't know. You know, I don't know. But it goes down, the roots go down 2 feet and they're sucking up the water and the nutrients in competition with the dogwood. And I would probably not put such a competitive plant next to a dogwood. But then yours might be doing fine. But test the soil before you do anything. Did you have a question?
We also have a 19-ounce, which is beautiful.
A what?
A 19-ounce.
I've never heard of that. It's a good one. Mhm. Well, I don't know that plant.
Yeah.
Mhm. Moss is good. It's okay.
Yeah, and I probably after. But it's a beautiful tree, but I didn't know whether it was possible, you know, to prune. It doesn't seem to me.
Well, I'd look it up. I'd look up pruning. There are a lot of good pruning videos too. I learned how to prune apple trees online.
You don't prune early.
No, not now. Because the reason if you prune an early spring flowering tree now, you're going to get rid of all the blossoms. Yeah, I would. Well, if it blooms that late, you could probably. Do you need to prune it? Also, not all things need pruning. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Someone told me I need to cut my rose, I need to tuck it rose,
Mhm.
growing up trellis, and she told me to cut it all the way back down to almost to the ground in November.
You know, I'm not an expert on roses, but it sounds reasonable. But I probably wouldn't do it until spring, but I'd certainly look it up. Again, I will tell you all when I don't know something. Yeah, she wanted to know what to do with a climbing rose. Then someone had suggested she cut it off to about 12 inches or 18 inches from the ground. Does anybody in the audience know what you do with a rose like that? I mean, when you prune it? Us gardeners, all of us in this room, we learn from each other. And I haven't done roses very well because I've never did roses very well, but I now have 3. Yes, sir.
Any suggestions?
Take the plant out, throw it away. You'll find that your heirlooms have it more than the others. I didn't plant heirlooms this year. I had no blight. So it can, but the other plants just didn't, they had the resistance needed. I didn't get blight. So observation, no heirloom plants. And I love the heirloom taste. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my heirlooms in pots up on the porch. So if they get infected, I can just take them out and they won't have time to spread. Keep, oh, yeah.
The side of the book, it's getting quite big, but it's so ugly in the summer.
Because she's,
Suggested to prune them, but I don't want the main. I like it for the insect.
so she has a Harry Lauder walking stick and it has lots of little wonderful owies on it, right? It's going to creep. It's going to continue creep by underground roots. It's going to continue to, it'll form a whole thicket. So if you want to control that, prune the ones on the outside and then go in the inside of the plant and just create space. Well, I would do it in spring again, late winter, early spring. There's very few things you prune outside of that time frame. Just the flowering trees that flower very early. Shrubs are also my favorite. So if you're going to have a garden that's easy to take care of, I would focus on shrubs and trees. And once you get the backbone of your garden, then you can start planting your perennials. I happen to have loved the daylilies. I've never had this many daylilies in my life, but I went to Oaks daylilies and they have all sorts of interesting tetraploids. And I ordered some of those and I'm trying them out and seeing how they do. A girlfriend of mine down the street has them doing really well. So I said, well, I'll try it too. So yes, ma'am. With what? Hibiscus syriacus, hibiscus plant, tree, shrub. So there's something called, is it Rose of Sharon? So if it's a hibiscus shrub, it's a Hibiscus syriacus or Rose of Sharon. Yes, what the question on is? You can't get. There's something going on in the soil. Test the soil. It's only, it's less than $20, I believe, but it's at UMass Amherst to get the full test. Locally, we only do pH, but you're going to want to know what the NPK is. Plus, they will go through some micronutrients too. If I had my dream pH, it'd be 6.8 to 7.2.
But that's not possible.
No, Oregon is 5. It depends. You have to test it, but I find I test soil at our center to see what the pH is. I have never gotten anything above a 6. So it's all acidic. And I have a mentor and she says, well, I'm going, Jeannie, I'm to test soil. I said, and how many of them will test low pH? I said, all of them. And she says, I'll have to see. Then afterwards she goes, yeah, all of them. Because pine trees, evergreens, those are all acidic. When they drop, rhodies, acid, when they drop, azaleas, when they drop, all those are adding acid to the soil.